A few weeks ago, ASAP Rocky did the unthinkable. He walked away scot-free after the most intense, high-stakes trial he's ever been involved with in his life. I mean, we're talking about serious charges that could have ended his career right then and there. And with the world watching, fans, critics, and the whole industry, how did he manage to beat the case and come out unscathed? The answer? It's crazier than you think. From contradicting testimonies to missing evidence and a defense that turned the entire narrative on its head, this trial had more plot twists than a blockbuster movie. And while the prosecution tried to paint him as guilty beyond a shadow of a doubt, Rocky's team had a trick up their sleeve that flipped the script entirely. So buckle up, because we're diving into the wild courtroom drama, the lies, the mind games, and how Rocky's defense turned the prosecution's own arguments against them. This story isn't just about justice. It's about survival, fame, and beating the odds when everything seems stacked against you. So let's break it down. It all went down on November 6, 2021 around 10:20 p.m. when two former friends and longtime members of the ASAP mob, ASAP Rocky and ASAP Relly, had a face-off. Now, these two go way back, 14 years of friendship, brotherhood, and building their careers side by side. But like a lot of friendships in the industry, things had gotten complicated. Rumors of tension between them had been bubbling for a while, and that night they finally decided to meet up and hash it out. Now, according to Relly's story, they agreed to link up near the W Hotel on Hollywood Boulevard, one of those flashy spots where celebrities are as common as overpriced cocktails. But this wasn't going to be just a friendly catch-up. As soon as Relly got there, Rocky was already waiting, accompanied by two other ASAP members, ASAP Ills and ASAP 12y. And then it all kicked off. Relly claimed that Rocky immediately got up in his face, grabbing him by the collar of his sweatshirt, yanking him closer, and firing off some heated words. ASAP Ills, trying to play peacemaker, stepped in to break it up, but instead of cooling things down, things only escalated. According to Relly, Rocky didn't just stop at some harsh words. He allegedly pulled out a black semi-automatic handgun, pressing it right against his chest, threatening to end Relly right there. Relly claimed that after threatening him, Rocky tucked the gun back into his waistband and started walking away, but Relly wasn't done. He followed Rocky, still trying to sort things out, still hoping to squash the beef, and that's when it allegedly went from tense to terrifying. Relly said Rocky suddenly turned around, pulled the gun out again, and fired a shot from about 16 feet away. He felt a sudden sting in his left hand and realized his knuckles had been grazed by a bullet. But here's where it gets even messier. Surveillance footage from that night does show Rocky and his crew at the scene. You can spot them in the grainy video, and you can even hear what sounds like gunshots echoing through the night. There was also a cut showing Rocky fleeing the scene, followed closely by ASAP 12y, but it's not clear enough to see who did what. It's just enough to stir up doubt and confusion. Now let's get into how the prosecution tried to take down ASAP Rocky. From the jump, they knew they didn't have much to work with. There was no gun, no forensic proof, and not a single bullet to tie Rocky to the crime, but they did have one thing that they were banking on: Relly's testimony. Yeah, that's right, Relly's word was their golden ticket. The entire case rested on whether or not the jury could believe his story. They painted Rocky as the aggressor, claiming that he had pulled out a real, fully loaded semi-automatic handgun and fired it right at Relly, grazing his hand. But as dramatic as that sounds, there were problems with their argument from the jump. First up is the surveillance footage. The prosecution hyped it up like it was some damning piece of evidence, but when it finally hit the courtroom, it was, well, disappointing. The video was grainy, shaky, and shot from too far away to make out anything clearly. Sure, you could spot Rocky and his crew at the scene, and yeah, you could hear something that sounded like gunshots, but there was no smoking gun, literally and figuratively. Just a bunch of blurry figures moving around and some echoing pops. Next, they pulled out what they thought would be the ace up their sleeve: the shell casings. Relly told the court he found two of them at the scene about 52 minutes after the alleged shooting. He claimed he'd just walked back to the spot and, like some kind of detective, picked up the casings that everyone else had supposedly missed. Now, think about that for a second. How could you come back to the scene of a crime about an hour later and conveniently spot shell casings? That sounds pretty sketchy. And it gets even better or worse, depending on how you look at it. Relly didn't hand over those shell casings to the cops immediately. No, he sat on them for 2 whole days before finally deciding to turn them in. The prosecution tried to brush that off like it wasn't a big deal, but come on. If you're trying to convince a jury that someone shot at you, wouldn't you want to hand over the evidence right away? But the prosecution wasn't done yet. They brought in a witness, a woman who claimed she saw the whole thing go down from the 7th floor of her apartment building. Now, according to her, she saw a man fire a gun and then someone went down, but here's the kicker. She wasn't even sure if anyone was hit. The whole testimony was vague and full of doubt. It was like she wanted to help, but didn't really have anything solid to offer. And let's not forget the biggest problem of all, the missing gun. Despite the prosecution swearing up and down that Rocky fired a real firearm, they never actually found one. No weapon was recovered, nothing, and that alone put a huge dent in their case. So what did they really have? A blurry video, some suspiciously found shell casings, and one woman's shaky testimony. Oh, and Relly's story, which kept changing depending on who was asking the questions. It didn't take long for people in the courtroom to start thinking that the prosecution's case wasn't as airtight as they made it seem. In fact, it seemed like it was barely holding itself together. Now let's talk about how Rocky's defense team completely flipped the script and made the prosecution's case look like a bad joke. From the moment they stepped into the courtroom, they knew they didn't just have to prove Rocky was innocent, they had to tear apart the prosecution's story so convincingly that the jury would be left with no choice but to doubt everything they'd heard. And boy, they did just that. Their strategy was to challenge the very foundation of the prosecution's case, starting with the alleged weapon itself. The biggest hole in the narrative was the supposed firearm. No gun had been recovered, no forensics tied Rocky to a real firearm, and yet the prosecution swore he shot Relly with a real semi-automatic. That was their main argument, and the defense knew they could turn that on its head. Rocky's lawyer, Joe Tacopina, didn't even try to pretend that nothing happened that night. Instead, he did something unexpected. He admitted that Rocky fired shots, but here's the genius twist. He argued that the shots came from a prop gun, not a real one. He straight up acknowledged that it was indeed Rocky in that grainy surveillance footage pulling the trigger, but he claimed it was all part of a music video shoot. The shots were blanks because they were not real bullets. This was a masterstroke. Instead of trying to cover up what was already out there, the defense reframed it. They didn't deny that the shots were fired, they just argued that they were fake shots from a prop gun, used for artistic effect and not to harm anyone. And here's where it gets really interesting. The defense brought in witnesses to back up that claim, people who testified that Relly knew all along it was just a prop. These witnesses explained that Relly had been involved in the planning of the video shoot and knew the gun wasn't real. So why would he suddenly act like it was some life-threatening situation? The defense said basically, if he knew it was fake, then why is he acting like he almost died? And that wasn't even the end of it. The defense didn't just stop at poking holes in the story, they went after Relly's motives. Joe Tacopina made it very clear that Relly had plenty of reasons to make up a story and blow the whole thing out of proportion. The main one was money. See, this whole legal battle was unfolding. Relly had already slapped Rocky with a civil lawsuit trying to squeeze some cash out of him. And it wasn't just about justice for him, it was about getting paid. The defense painted him as someone who was willing to spin a wild story to cash in on Rocky's fame and fortune. Think about it. Why else would he wait days before handing over the shell casings, and why would his story keep changing every time he opened his mouth? But wait, it gets even weirder. Relly's medical situation made his story even harder to believe. You'd think that if someone actually got grazed by a bullet, they'd rush to the nearest hospital, right? Well, wrong. Instead, Relly just packed his bags, hopped on a plane, and flew all the way back to New York before even seeking treatment. He didn't even get checked out in LA, where the alleged shooting took place. That little detail raised eyebrows everywhere. I mean, who gets shot and then just shrugs it off until they're back home? Truthfully, it made the whole injury claim feel less like a real trauma and more like a poorly rehearsed story. The defense wasted no time in pointing out how sketchy that sounded. And then came the biggest blow to the prosecution's credibility: the inconsistent testimonies. Relly's story wasn't just falling apart, it was practically self-destructing. Every time he was asked to recall details, something changed. First, he said the shots came from 16 feet away. Then he backtracked. Then he claimed the shell casings were found immediately after the incident, but later admitted it was hours later. The defense wasn't just proving Rocky's innocence, they were making it crystal clear that Relly couldn't keep his own story straight. It got to the point where even people following the trial online were saying things like, "This dude's lying through his teeth." And let's not forget about those text messages that came to light. Messages where Relly seemed way more interested in getting paid than in seeing Rocky brought to justice. When they were confronted with those texts, Relly did what any shady witness would do. He claimed they were fake. The courtroom practically rolled its collective eyes. Everything about Relly's testimony was sketchy, from his shady evidence gathering to his suspicious medical choices and his ever-changing story. It wasn't just about whether or not Rocky fired a gun anymore, it was about whether the prosecution had any credibility left at all. By the time the defense was done, it wasn't Rocky on trial, it was Relly's integrity. And the jury couldn't ignore how sloppy and inconsistent the whole case had become. They didn't just doubt the story, they doubted the entire reason this case even existed. And this is exactly why the jury couldn't convict Rocky. They had just one job: decide if he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. There was no way they were going to convict him based on one man's word, especially when that man had proven time and time again that he couldn't keep his story straight. The prosecution had staked their whole case on Relly's testimony, but when that testimony crumbled, so did their shot at a conviction. No gun, no forensic proof, and no reliable witnesses, just a messy story that didn't add up. For Rocky, this wasn't just a court victory, it was a victory for his reputation, career, and his freedom. And as he left the courthouse, his head held high, you knew he wasn't just walking away from a legal battle, he was reclaiming his life, ready to put the drama behind him and move forward. With the trial finally behind him, ASAP Rocky wasted no time getting back to business. The man's been on fire since walking out of that courtroom, already plotting his comeback and letting the world know he's far from done. After all, nothing says I'm back like dropping your first solo album since 2018 and headlining major festivals. Yeah, that's right, Rocky's got a new album on the way and he's about to be front and center at Rolling Loud and many other festivals for the rest of the year. The buzz is unreal and it feels like he's not just bouncing back, he's coming back stronger than ever. But what do you think about the verdict? Did justice prevail or was the whole case just a mess from the start? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below because we want to hear from you. And if you're into stories like this one, make sure to subscribe for more of the real, unfiltered breakdowns on all your favorite hip-hop dramas. Hit that like button and join the family because we've got more fire content coming your way.